He was just a single dad picking up his daughter on a rainy afternoon until he threw himself in front of a speeding car to save a woman in a wedding dress. He didn't know her name. He didn't ask where she came from. But what happened next would change all three of their lives forever. If you love heartwarming stories about unexpected kindness, healing, and second chances, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that could touch your heart. Now let's begin. A single dad jumped in front of a speeding car. He didn't know the woman was a billionaire bride. The rain came down in sharp, cold needles, turning the narrow street in Ridgefield into a glistening ribbon of black. Luke Tanner's pickup truck rumbled to a stop just outside Willow Creek Elementary, windshield wipers groaning against the downpour. He leaned over the passenger seat, pushing the door open for his daughter. "There's my girl." He smiled as Maddie ran toward the truck backpack, bouncing shoes splashing through the puddles. She climbed in with the urgency only a 10-year-old could possess. "I made a turtle out of pipe cleaners today," she announced, breathless, as Luke reached over to fasten her seatbelt. "Is that right?" he chuckled. "Remind me to call NASA. We've got a future inventor on our hands." The wipers swiped again. Luke shifted into drive, eased into the road, and turned onto Main Street. It was supposed to be a quiet Friday. His last delivery for the garage had been postponed. Maddie wanted tomato soup for dinner, and he had every intention of watching reruns of the Andy Griffith Show with her on the old couch. Then everything changed. It happened so fast that Luke would replay it over and over again for years to come, never quite sure how his body reacted before his mind caught up. A blur of white, a scream, a honk blaring through the rain. Ahead, a woman in a soaking wedding dress was sprinting down the sidewalk, veering into the street like a deer trapped in headlights. Her veil flailed behind her like a tattered flag hair, drenched eyes wild. A delivery van came barreling toward her tires, skimming the water horn blasting. She didn't see it, but Luke did. "Maddie, stay in the truck," he shouted, slamming the brakes, throwing the door open. The rain was icy as it hit his skin. He sprinted, heart in his throat, legs flying across the slick pavement. The woman turned just as Luke reached her. Time slowed. He didn't think. He didn't even look at the van. He just lunged. The impact threw them both to the ground, bodies tangled, her head hitting his chest with a soft thud. The van whooshed past, inches from his boots horn, still wailing as it disappeared down the street. Silence fell again, broken only by the soft patter of rain on pavement. Luke lay on his back, breathing hard, arms wrapped around the trembling woman in white. Her eyes blinked open, full of shock. Mascara streaked down her cheeks, mixing with rain and tears. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. "You okay?" he asked, voice low, steady, despite the adrenaline still hammering in his chest. She nodded, just barely. "Can you move?" Another nod. He helped her sit up slowly. Her hands were shaking. Her dress, once pristine, was torn and soaked through. The veil slipped from her hair and lay forgotten in the gutter. Maddie appeared a few steps away, her tiny face pale beneath her hood. "Daddy?" she called, uncertain. "It's okay, sweetheart," Luke said quickly, holding up a hand. "Everything's okay now." The woman looked up at him, then truly looked, and something flickered behind her eyes. Gratitude, confusion, fear, something else he couldn't name. She tried to stand, wobbled. Luke steadied her, his calloused hands surprisingly gentle. "Where were you going?" he asked. I don't know," she murmured. Her voice was hoarse, shaky. "I just had to run. You've got somewhere safe to be." She hesitated. That pause told him everything. "No," she said finally. "Not anymore." Luke exhaled slowly. He glanced back at his truck, then at the woman, this complete stranger in a wedding dress who nearly died on his watch. He didn't know what her story was, but something told him she didn't need questions right now. "Come with us," he said simply. "You're freezing. We'll get you dry. Figure it out from there." "I can't pay you," she whispered. "Didn't ask you to." The words hit her like something sacred. 15 minutes later, Luke pulled the truck into the gravel driveway of their modest two-bedroom house on the edge of town. He helped the woman inside, gave her a clean towel, and one of his late wife's old flannel shirts still folded neatly in the linen closet untouched for years. Maddie stood by the kitchen door watching everything with wide eyes. "She's pretty," she whispered. Luke smiled faintly. "She's lost." The woman emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in the oversized shirt and a blanket hair towel, dried barefoot, but warm. She looked out of place among the worn wood furniture and framed crayon drawings on the wall. Luke poured her a mug of tea. "What's your name?" She opened her mouth, paused, then said softly, "Eva." "Eva," he repeated. "I'm Luke. That's Maddie." Maddie gave a shy little wave. "Thank you," Eva murmured. "For everything." Luke nodded. "Whatever you're running from, you're safe here. For now." Eva looked down at the tea hands cradling the warmth. For a long time she said nothing, but in that silence something shifted. Not the thunder outside, not the ticking clock on the wall, but the beginning of something fragile and new, something born not of romance, not yet, but of grace, of kindness without condition, of a door opened not for answers, but for hope. And neither of them knew yet, but that one moment on the road had already begun rewriting all of their lives. The rain had slowed by morning, leaving behind a misty stillness that clung to the windows of Luke Tanner's kitchen like breath against glass. Inside, the scent of coffee brewed low and rich, mixing with the faint aroma of maple syrup and toasting bread. Luke stood at the stove, flipping pancakes, dressed in his usual flannel and jeans, as if the night before hadn't rewritten the entire rhythm of his quiet life. At the small kitchen table, Eva sat wrapped in Maddie's old fleece blanket, her eyes scanning the room like someone trying to memorize where they'd landed. Her hair, damp last night, now curled softly around her face. She looked human this morning. Less like a ghost in a wedding dress and more like someone trying to hold it together. Maddie sat beside her, chattering like a bird. "Daddy makes pancakes every Saturday. Sometimes we put chocolate chips in them, but he forgot to buy some this week." Luke glanced over his shoulder, amused. "Throwing me under the bus already," Eva smiled faintly. "Chocolate chipless pancakes still sound wonderful." Her voice was warmer now, but the distance in her eyes hadn't left. She kept brushing a spot on her left ring finger as though forgetting the ring was gone. Luke noticed, but said nothing. When he brought the plates over, Eva startled at the clatter of the forks as if she wasn't used to loud, normal things. "You sleep okay?" he asked, setting her coffee down gently. She hesitated. "It's been a while since I slept through the night, but yes. Thank you." Maddie dug into her pancakes. "Are you going to stay another night?" Sweetheart Luke warned gently, "That's not polite to ask." Eva gave him a small shake of the head, signaling she didn't mind. She looked at Maddie, then at Luke. "If it's not too much trouble, just one more night. I'll be gone after that." Luke met her gaze and saw what she didn't say. She had nowhere else to go. Later that afternoon, Luke stepped out to the garage to finish patching up an old Chevy someone had abandoned for repairs months ago. The rhythmic clank of metal, the steady buzz of tools, it was his meditation. But today, it wasn't enough to settle the questions building in his mind. Who runs from a wedding in the middle of a storm? Why lie about your name? And what kind of woman doesn't even flinch when nearly killed in traffic but jumps at a dropped fork? Still, he didn't press her. Maybe because something in her reminded him of himself in the months after his wife passed, when you're alive, but just barely. When even kindness feels too heavy to accept. When he returned inside just before sunset, the living room was dim, the only light coming from the fireplace where Maddie had convinced Eva to build a small flame using one of her storybooks as a guide. "She's a fast learner," Maddie said proudly, "even if she doesn't know where we keep the matches." Luke chuckled. "Well, that's a start." Eva was cross-legged on the floor, the blanket now forgotten hair pinned up messily. She looked up at him, and for the first time there was something close to comfort in her eyes. "I cleaned the kitchen," she said quietly. "I hope that was okay. It felt good to do something." "You didn't have to," Luke said. "I know. That's why I wanted to." As Maddie drifted off on the couch watching an old cartoon VHS tape, Luke brought Eva a glass of water and sat on the edge of the recliner opposite her. The fire crackled between them. "You don't have to tell me anything you're not ready to," he said, breaking the quiet. "But if you need help, I need to know what I'm dealing with." Eva stared into the fire. "What if I don't know what I need?" Luke folded his arms. "Then we start with what you're running from." She hesitated. Then, slowly, she began. "I was supposed to be married yesterday. A wedding my mother planned. A man my father chose. A life I had no say in." Her voice wavered, but she didn't stop. It looked perfect from the outside. Designer dress cathedral venue cameras waiting out front. But inside, I couldn't breathe. Luke said nothing, letting her fill the space. "I didn't love him," she went on. "I barely knew him, but I knew what was expected. I'd been playing the part for so long I forgot what it meant to want something of my own." "So you ran," he said quietly. She nodded. "In my wedding dress. Past security. Out the back gate. I ran until I didn't know where I was anymore." Luke leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "That's one hell of a leap." "I thought it'd feel like freedom," she whispered, "but it felt like falling." For a long time, neither spoke. Only the fire did its small voice hissing against the wood. Luke finally asked Eva, "That your real name?" She looked at him startled, then smiled, sad, a little ashamed. "It's part of it. My full name's Evelyn Margaret Reed." The name hung between them, heavy with unspoken weight. He blinked once. Reed. The name was familiar. It took a second. Then he remembered. Reed Aerospace. Reed Pharmaceuticals. A family name that made Forbes annually. But he didn't react. Instead, he nodded. "Ava, it is." She blinked hard, the relief breaking something loose behind her ribs. "You're not going to ask why I lied." He shook his head. "Didn't seem like you lied for fun. Seemed like you lied because the truth didn't feel safe." She let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. That night, as Luke checked on Maddie and turned out the lights, he passed the closed guest room door and paused. Inside, he knew slept a woman who had the world at her feet but chose to trade it for silence and shelter. He didn't know her story fully. He didn't know the consequences waiting at their doorstep. But he did know one thing for certain. She wasn't just running from something. She was running toward something, too. And maybe, just maybe, this was the first time she'd landed somewhere that didn't ask her to be anyone but herself. The storm had passed, but a soft fog still clung to the yard like breath on glass, blurring the trees at the edge of the Tanner property. Inside the modest house, warmth gathered around the glow of a single table lamp and the faint scent of cinnamon tea. Eva, no. Evelyn, though Luke still called her Eva, sat cross-legged on the living room rug, her knees tucked under one of Maddie's old blankets. She'd just finished helping Maddie assemble a cardboard model of a jet engine, one of the school's science kits, and now the girl had collapsed asleep on the couch, mouth slightly open, arms flopped over her stuffed fox. Luke watched from the recliner, sipping his coffee. "She'll be out for hours. Don't let the engine fool you. She's got a soft spot for bedtime." Eva smiled at Maddie, the smile quiet and tender. "She's remarkable." "She's resilient," Luke replied. "Got that from her mom." That brought a pause. Eva glanced toward him, cautiously unsure if the memory was welcome. "Your wife." She passed. Luke gave a single nod. 3 years this March. Ovarian cancer. Caught too late. Maddie was only 7. He took another sip, eyes fixed on the fire. "I thought I knew grief before that. Turns out I didn't have a clue." Eva lowered her gaze. "I'm sorry." "I know," he said softly. Silence crept into the room again, but not a tense silence. It was a shared understanding, a quiet agreement between two people who had each lost something no one else could quite name. Eva drew the blanket tighter. I've always wondered what it's like to have a home like this. Luke raised an eyebrow. Like what? She gestured vaguely. Worn carpets, crooked light switches, a fridge covered in drawings. Nothing curated, nothing performative. Just life. Luke chuckled. You'd be surprised how much of this charm is just bad plumbing and second-hand furniture. I'd take that over marble floors and imported orchids, she muttered almost to herself. Something in her voice made him pause. It wasn't disdain for wealth, it was weariness, as if luxury had become a cage rather than a privilege. You never had a place of your own, he asked. She hesitated, then shook her head. No, I've always lived in houses owned by someone else. My father, the board, the firm, they were never mine. Luke watched her, something stirring in his chest he hadn't felt in a long time. Not desire, not yet. Something deeper. Recognition. Maybe even kinship. Eva caught him watching and tried to change the subject. What's that? She asked, pointing to an old guitar leaning against the wall. Oh, that Luke scratched the back of his neck. That's a dust collector. Can you play used to? Haven't touched it in a while. She smiled, and for the first time it was playful. Bet you're the type that plays old country songs and pretends you don't know all the words. Luke let out a low laugh. You wouldn't be entirely wrong. Eva stood, walked over, and picked up the guitar. She carried it back to him, cradling it like something sacred. Play something. He shook his head. It's probably out of tune, I don't care. Luke hesitated, then took the guitar, adjusted the tuning pegs, and strummed a slow, soft chord. His fingers were rougher than they used to be, but the sound still came out steady, full of something almost nostalgic. He started humming the first few bars of Harvest Moon by Neil Young. Eva closed her eyes just for a moment. My mother used to play that on the record player when I was little. Luke didn't say anything. He just kept playing, and Eva leaned back on her elbows watching the fire. Later, after Maddie had been carried to bed and the fire had dwindled to glowing embers, Eva stood in the doorway of the guest room. Luke was walking past with an armful of folded towels when she stopped him. Luke, she said quietly. He turned. Yeah, thank you. For not asking more than I can give. He met her gaze. When someone shows up in a wedding dress with no suitcase, no plan, and no real name, it's safe to assume there's a story. But stories aren't always ready to be told. She nodded, slowly, her voice near a whisper. You're not like most people I've known. Luke gave a half smile. You're not like most people I've pulled out of traffic. That made her laugh softly, and she looked away, brushing hair behind her ear. Then, without warning, the emotion in her face cracked just a little. I didn't leave because I was scared of commitment. I left because I was scared I'd disappear. Luke's expression softened. I felt like I was being traded, she continued, voice tightening. A pawn in my father's next merger, my fiancé. It was more of a deal than a relationship. There were prenups before there were flowers. Luke stepped closer, not to intrude, but to anchor. You don't owe anyone your life, Eva. Not even your family. She looked up. I think I wanted someone to say that more than anything else. He handed her the towels gently. Then, let me be the first. She clutched them to her chest like armor. Good night, Luke. Good night, Eva. When the door clicked shut behind her, Luke lingered for a moment in the hallway. He stared at the space she'd just occupied, then looked down the hall toward Maddie's room, where the soft glow of her nightlight flickered behind a cracked door. Something was shifting. Not fast, not loudly, but undeniably. He didn't know where this was going. He didn't know what Eva would choose tomorrow or if she'd vanish just as suddenly as she'd appeared. But he knew this much. Sometimes the most extraordinary stories don't begin with declarations or confessions. They begin with a stranger, a cup of tea, A broken silence and a borrowed name whispered in the dark. The morning sun crept in slow, casting golden stripes across the hardwood floor. Luke stood in the kitchen with a mug of black coffee watching through the window as a pair of robins picked through the damp grass for worms. The fog had finally lifted. It felt like the kind of morning that belonged to new beginnings, quiet, unannounced, but unmistakable. He turned at the sound of footsteps. Eva stood in the hallway wrapped in the flannel shirt he'd lent her, her bare feet silent on the floor. She looked rested, though a little hesitant, like someone stepping into a house they weren't sure they were allowed to belong to. Luke gestured to the coffee pot. There's still some left. Might be a little strong. I like strong, she said, voice hoarse with sleep. Thank you. She poured herself a mug and stood across from him, both of them watching the backyard as if it were a stage for something just out of reach. I heard Maddie leave for school, she said. You two always leave that early. Luke nodded. I open the garage at 8. She likes being the first kid at the gate. Says it gives her time to think. Eva smiled faintly. She's got a big heart. She gets that from her mom, Luke said, and then catching himself added, but her stubbornness, that's all me. Eva sipped her coffee and glanced around. This place is peaceful. Not perfect, but peaceful. Luke looked at her, then really looked. What does perfect mean to someone like you anyway? Eva took a long breath. It used to mean clean lines, no mistakes, well-orchestrated exits. But now, I think it means a place where I don't feel like I'm on display, where I can breathe without rehearsing. Luke set his mug down. Then you're in the right town. Later that day, while Luke was at work, Eva found herself in the small overgrown backyard walking barefoot through the dewy grass. She stopped beside a weathered wooden bench shaded by a crepe myrtle tree, half-bloomed and trembling in the breeze. She sat and closed her eyes. The silence wasn't hollow like it was in her father's mansion. It was full of wind of birdsong, of distant laughter from a neighbor's yard. For the first time in what felt like years, she didn't feel like running. She just sat there, breathing in the ordinary, letting the stillness fill the cracks inside her. Around noon, she wandered into the garage. Luke was bent under the hood of a '94 Ford Ranger, his shirt stained with grease sweat lining his brow. The radio played an old Don Henley song, barely audible over the clink of metal. "Need a hand?" Eva asked. Luke looked up startled, then grinned. "You sure you want to ruin that flannel? It's seen enough trauma." She shrugged. "I could use something to keep my hands busy." He stepped aside and handed her a rag. "All right, Miss Eva. You ever worked with a serpentine belt before? No idea what that is." "Perfect," he smirked. "Let's make some noise." They spent the next hour side by side, Eva learning to twist bolts and identify parts with names like gasket and idler pulley. She messed up twice, apologized 4 times. But by the end, her fingers were smudged with grease and her cheeks flushed with something close to joy. "I haven't had this much fun in—" I don't know how long, she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Luke handed her a cold soda. "Work with your hands long enough your heart stops spinning so much. That's what my dad used to say." She took the soda and looked around. "How many lives have you fixed in here?" Luke wiped his hands on a towel. "Some engines just need patience. Others need parts replaced. And some just need to be reminded they're worth starting again." Eva didn't speak, but her eyes said enough. That evening, they sat on the back porch with Maddie, who had returned from school, eager to show Eva her new reading badge. "I got it for finishing Charlotte's Web." She beamed. Eva's face lit up. "That's one of my favorites." "Mine, too." The end was sad, though, Maddie admitted. "Sometimes sad things remind us how lucky we are to feel something," Eva said gently. Luke looked at her, surprised by the quiet wisdom in her tone. Maddie cocked her head. "Do you have a kid?" Eva paused. "No, but I've always wanted to know what it's like. To belong to something real." Maddie took her hand without hesitation. You can belong with us." Luke watched the exchange and felt something shift in his chest. A tether he didn't know was still loose finally tied itself into place. After Maddie went to bed, Eva lingered on the porch steps. Luke brought out a blanket and sat beside her. "Today was a good day," she whispered. He nodded. "Yeah, it was." She turned to him, eyes wide in the moonlight. "I'm scared of what happens when I leave. You planning to—" "I promised it was just one more night." "Plans change." She laughed almost bitterly. "Not for people like me. Everything's scheduled, every hour, every detail. Then maybe it's time to be the person who makes the plans," Luke said, "not the one following them." Eva looked out at the stars. "You say that like it's easy. It's not. But it's worth it." Silence stretched again, not awkward, just heavy with unspoken things. Finally, Eva whispered, "This place feels like something I forgot existed." Luke didn't press her. He didn't ask what. He didn't need to, because deep down he understood exactly what she meant. A place to breathe. A place where your name didn't matter more than your heart. A place that asked nothing but honesty and gave back something stronger than safety. It gave back peace. And maybe for the first time in years, Eva was starting to believe she could stay still and still be free. It started with the newspaper. Luke had picked it up from the gas station on his way home from the garage, mostly out of habit. He never expected to see her on the front page. But there she was, center spread, grainy but unmistakable. A still from a security camera, a woman in a wedding dress running through a garden courtyard veil trailing behind her like a ghost. The headline read, "Billionaire bride still missing. Evelyn Reed disappears, hours before ceremony." Luke didn't say anything when he got home. He tucked the paper under a stack of mail, wiped his boots at the door, and entered the house with the weight of a new truth pressing against his ribs. Eva was in the kitchen helping Maddie with her homework. She had flour on her hands, a smudge of it on her cheek like she'd been baking or trying to. She looked up and smiled when she saw him, her eyes catching his for half a second too long. Luke smiled back, but it didn't reach his eyes. That evening, the three of them sat around the dinner table eating slightly lopsided cinnamon rolls and scrambled eggs. Maddie told a story about a lizard that escaped from the second-grade science lab. Eva laughed genuinely until she cried. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "This," she said, "is the kind of mess I never knew I needed." Luke watched her closely. "Some messes are worth keeping," he said. She looked at him, then really looked, and something passed between them that neither of them could name, but both of them felt. A question, a fear, a beginning. The knock on the door came the next morning. It was subtle but firm, like someone who already knew what they were going to find. Luke opened the door to see a man in a gray jacket and a badge clipped to his belt. He introduced himself as Agent Klein, Private Security for the Reed family. His tone was professional, but his eyes were sharp. "We're tracking down a missing person," he said. "We believe she may have passed through this area." Luke's jaw tensed. "Don't get many runaway billionaires in Ridgefield." The agent studied him. "Mind if I ask if you've seen anyone unusual?" "Young woman, mid-30s, last seen in a wedding gown." Luke hesitated. "Can't say I have." Klein didn't press. He handed Luke a card and nodded toward the driveway. "If you think of anything, give us a call." Luke waited until the SUV disappeared down the road before closing the door and locking it behind him. He found Eva sitting on the back porch, a cup of tea between her hands. "They're looking for you," he said quietly. She didn't flinch, just stared at the horizon. "I figured they would be." Luke sat beside her, elbows resting on his knees. "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" Eva looked down. "Because I wasn't sure who I was anymore." Her voice was low, steady. "I didn't want to be Evelyn Reed in your home. I just wanted to be a woman who got a second chance." Luke nodded slowly. "You lied." "I did," she admitted, "but not to hurt you. I lied so I could feel human. Not photographed, not marketed, just human. Silence stretched between them. I saw the paper he finally said. She looked up, startled. "And you didn't throw me out. I almost did." He exhaled, rubbed his palms together. "But then I remembered something. That first night when I pulled you out of the street, you didn't scream. You didn't fight. You looked at me like someone who had already hit the bottom." Eva's eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. "You weren't hiding because you were guilty," he continued. "You were hiding because no one ever taught you how to be found." That broke something inside her. She covered her mouth with her hand, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. "I didn't know where else to go," she choked. Luke reached out and rested a hand over hers. "You found somewhere." That night, Eva sat alone in the guest room, the newspaper clutched in her lap. She traced the photo with her fingers, the headlines, the rumors, the speculation. There were quotes from her fiancé's camp words like unstable and runaway words wrapped in false concern. There was no mention of her reasons, no curiosity about what she might have felt, only the fallout, the damage, the inconvenience. She folded the paper and tucked it into the drawer. Then she pulled out her phone, the one she hadn't touched in days, and opened a blank text message. To Mother, she typed and deleted, typed again. Finally, she wrote, "I'm safe. I'm not coming back not to that life. I need you to let me go." She stared at the screen, then hit send. Down the hall, Luke stood in Maddie's doorway, watching her sleep. The little girl murmured something in her dreams and clutched her stuffed fox tighter. Luke's chest tightened. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, what agents or reporters or lawyers might show up next. But for now, there was peace. And in that peace there was something else rising, quietly, undeniably. Hope, and maybe, just maybe love. Not the kind that comes in fireworks or declarations, but the kind that sneaks in through kindness, that grows in silence, that roots itself in trust. And as Luke turned off the hallway light, he didn't know what came next. But he knew this much. The first cracks didn't mean something was breaking. Sometimes they meant something was finally starting to let the light in. The night air settled heavy over Ridgefield, carrying the faint scent of pine and chimney smoke. Luke sat on the front porch steps, a mug of decaf coffee warming his hands. The stars were unusually clear, scattered across the sky like someone had cracked a jar of glitter over the world. From the open window behind him, he could hear the soft hum of Maddie's nightlight, a familiar sound, the kind that grounded him. The screen door creaked. Eva stepped out quietly, wearing the same flannel shirt she'd borrowed that first night. Her hair was pulled into a low ponytail, bare feet, brushing against the wood as she sat beside him. She held a mug of chamomile tea, both hands wrapped around it like it might anchor her to the moment. They sat in silence for a few beats, not needing to fill the space. Finally, Eva spoke. "Did you ever feel like the version of you the world sees isn't real?" Luke gave a low exhale. "Yeah. After my wife passed, people stopped asking how I was doing and started saying things like, 'You're strong. Maddie's lucky to have you.'" He shook his head. "But some nights I'd just sit in the garage staring at a carburetor I didn't have the heart to fix, wondering if I'd ever feel anything again." Eva nodded slowly. "I think I spent so long becoming the woman they needed me to be. I forgot how to just be a person." Luke looked over at her. "That why you ran?" She sipped her tea, then stared into the trees. "I didn't run away from a man. I ran from an identity, from expectations I never agreed to. My fiancé was a businessman first, a partner second. It was a merger in a white dress. My father negotiated it like a contract. My mother cried, but only when she thought the press would see." Luke frowned. "And you?" "I just stood there being silent like I always was, until I saw my reflection in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman looking back." She drew in a shaky breath. "So I took the service stairs, ripped the veil off, and didn't stop running until the world blurred." He let her speak without interruption, just listened because he sensed that no one ever had. "I thought maybe I'd find somewhere quiet," she continued. "A place where no one knew my name, where kindness wasn't a transaction." "You did," Luke said softly. Eva turned her head, met his gaze. There was no deflection in his eyes, just quiet truth. "I've wanted to tell you," she whispered. "Every day. But every time I opened my mouth I got scared you'd treat me differently. Because of your last name. Because of what it represents," she said. "Power, control, lies." Luke looked out at the trees. "Eva, or Evelyn, or whatever you choose to go by. You walked into my life when you didn't have to. You helped my daughter with her homework. You helped me clean grease off a carburetor. You laughed at my terrible pancakes. And you didn't treat this house like a hideout, you treated it like a home." She swallowed hard. "You're not angry. I'm a little hurt you didn't trust me with the truth. But I'm not angry." His voice softened. "Truth takes courage. And sometimes courage needs time." Eva was quiet for a long moment. Then she whispered, "It's Evelyn Margaret Reed." Luke nodded once. "Nice to meet you, Evelyn." She let out a soft laugh through her tears. "I never thought I'd hear someone say my full name and make me feel safe." He offered a lopsided grin. "Guess I've got a gift." Their eyes met again, longer this time. Then she asked quietly, "Why did you let me stay? Even after you knew Luke leaned back on his palms, gazing up at the stars. Because when you've watched someone you love fade away, when you've had to teach a little girl what it means to keep going when everything inside you is broken, you start to see things differently." He turned to her. "I saw someone trying to survive, and I figured maybe she just needed someone to remind her she still could." Her bottom lip trembled. She set her mug down beside her, then reached for his hand, slowly unsure. Luke didn't pull away. The touch was soft, careful, like two people discovering language in silence. "I don't know what comes next," she murmured. "You don't have to," he said. "You're allowed to just be." They sat like that for a long time, fingers intertwined, not lovers, not strangers, just two souls finally exhaling the weight of what they weren't. Later that night, as Luke checked on Maddie and closed her door, he walked past the guest room and found it open. Eva sat at the edge of the bed, the crumpled newspaper beside her. She looked up. "I sent a message to my mother. Told her I'm safe." Luke leaned against the doorway. "That's a start. I asked her to let me go." "And do you want to be let go?" Eva blinked. "No," she said finally. "Not by everyone." He took a step forward. "Then maybe it's time you stopped running." She smiled through the tears. "Maybe it is." Luke reached out gently, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You know Maddie keeps saying we should plant something out back. Something permanent. She wants a tree that stays." Eva closed her eyes and leaned into his hand just a little. "Maybe I do too." And though neither said it, both understood that this night was different. It wasn't the end of running. It was the beginning of staying. And beneath the quiet roof of a modest house in a town no one had ever heard of, two people who had lost too much finally found what they didn't know they needed. A name spoken in truth. A place offered in kindness. And the courage to be known and still be loved. The next morning came like a hush over the world. The air was crisp but kind, and the light filtering through the kitchen windows was golden, almost forgiving. Luke stood barefoot in the kitchen, whisking pancake batter while humming off-key. It was Saturday Pancake Day, and for the first time in years it felt like a ritual shared, not endured. Eva sat at the table, hair tied back loosely, flipping through Maddie's sketchbook as the little girl narrated each drawing with pride. "This one's our house," Maddie explained, pointing to a scribble of a cabin with puffs of smoke curling out of the chimney. "That's you, me, Daddy, and the fox." Eva smiled. "The fox. She lives under the porch. I named her Clementine." Luke laughed from the stove. "We don't have a porch fox." "Yes, we do," Maddie insisted, crossing her arms. She's just sneaky." Eva looked at Maddie with a mixture of awe and tenderness. "I hope she stays forever." Maddie paused, then asked carefully, "Will you?" The question hung in the air like a fragile ornament, shimmering delicate, waiting to fall. Eva opened her mouth, but no sound came. Luke turned toward them, brow furrowed, but said nothing. Maddie looked away. "It's okay if you don't," she whispered. "I just like when you're here." Eva reached for the little girl's hand. "I like being here too, Maddie. More than you know." Luke watched them quietly, feeling something unfurl inside his chest, something like home expanding beyond his own heartbeat. That afternoon, the three of them took a trip into town for the fall festival, a modest affair hosted in the town square. Pumpkin pies lined makeshift tables, kids darted between hay bales, and a small brass band played old folk songs under strings of yellow lights. Eva had borrowed a denim jacket from Luke and walked beside him and Maddie like she'd been doing it for years. They stopped at a booth where Maddie insisted on trying to win a stuffed bear by tossing rings onto milk bottles. After several valiant but failed attempts, Luke handed the vendor a $5 bill, only for Eva to step up with a determined grin. "Mind if I try?" She rolled her sleeves, narrowed her eyes, and with surprising accuracy landed 2 rings in a row. Maddie shrieked with delight as the vendor reluctantly handed over the bear. Eva beamed and handed it to the little girl. For bravery in the face of impossible odds, Maddie squeezed the bear and threw her arms around Eva without hesitation. Luke watched them, warmth pooling in his chest like a memory he didn't know he'd missed. Later that evening, as twilight fell and the festival lights shimmered like stars strung across the square, Luke and Eva sat on a bench near the edge of the crowd, watching Maddie dance in circles with a group of kids to the rhythm of a fiddle. "She looks so free," Eva murmured. "She is," Luke said. "We tried hard to make sure she wouldn't carry what we couldn't fix." Eva looked at him. "You've done more than try, Luke. You've lived for her." He glanced at her eyes, steady. "And what about you?" She exhaled, her voice soft. "I've been existing. But here, for the first time in a long while, I feel like I'm not pretending." Luke reached over and gently brushed a speck of hay from her shoulder. "Then maybe it's time you stopped asking yourself where you're supposed to be." She looked at him, her voice barely audible. "You think I could belong here?" Luke didn't smile, didn't joke. He just said, "I think you already do." When they returned home, Maddie was asleep in the truck, her arms around the bear. Luke carried her inside while Eva unlocked the front door. They laid her gently on the couch, and Eva tucked a quilt around her shoulders. "She'll be out until morning," Luke said with a smile. Eva stood in the soft lamplight, her hair a little windblown, the denim jacket slipping off one shoulder. "This house is full of something," she said. Luke raised an eyebrow. "Dust." She laughed, then shook her head. "Grace." He swallowed the word, sitting heavy and sacred in the air. "You brought some of that with you." Eva looked down, then up again. Her eyes held something vulnerable, something true. "I know this wasn't supposed to happen, that I wasn't supposed to show up here in your life. But I don't want to go back, Luke. Not to that house, that family, that name." Luke stepped closer, his voice low. "Then don't. But I don't have anything to offer," she whispered. "No skills, no plan. Just a heart that's finally waking up." Luke took her hand. "That's more than enough." She blinked, tears catching on her lashes. "I want to stay, but not as a guest, not as a secret." "Then don't be." He paused. "Be real. With us. With yourself." She nodded, breath shaking. And just like that, the tension between them, weeks in the making, broke open into something tender, something honest. Luke leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. Not a kiss, not yet. Just closeness. Just choice. That night, Eva wrote a letter she would never send. "Dear Mother, I found a place that doesn't ask me to wear shoes I never picked or speak like a woman I don't know. I found a little girl who believes I'm magic and a man who looks at me like I'm not broken. I don't know what this is yet, but it's real, and I think I might be brave enough to keep it." She folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beside the newspaper. Then she turned out the light slipped under the quilt Maddie had chosen for her, and for the first time since the day she ran Evelyn Margaret Reed, once a bride, now just a woman, fell asleep without fear. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, and somewhere under the porch, Clementine the fox curled into herself safe beneath the place that was slowly becoming home. The house felt quieter than usual. Not the peaceful kind, the other kind. The kind of quiet that follows the slamming of a door. Luke stood in the middle of the living room staring at the empty mug Eva had left on the table. A faint ring of tea stained the wood. Next to it a note. Just a single line in careful handwriting. "I had to go. Thank you for everything." His fingers gripped the paper too tightly, crumpling the edge as his mind scrambled for an explanation. She was here just last night, dancing with Maddie at the festival, laughing in the truck, whispering that she wanted to stay. He sank slowly onto the couch, staring at the note heart hammering with something that felt too close to loss. Again. From the hallway, Maddie's voice floated in hesitant. "Daddy." He quickly smoothed out his face before she reached the room. "Hey, kiddo." "Where's Eva?" she asked, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "She said she'd help me pick out a book today." Luke hesitated. She had to leave early. Something came up. Maddie stared at him. "But she said she wouldn't go." "I know." Her lip quivered, but she blinked it back. "Did she leave because of me?" Luke pulled her into his lap. "No, never. Sometimes adults have to figure out hard things. That doesn't mean they don't care." Maddie was quiet for a long while. Then she whispered, "I think she wanted to stay. I think maybe. She just didn't know how." Luke swallowed hard, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Yeah, I think you're right." Eva sat in the back of a black SUV as it wound its way out of Ridgefield, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Across from her sat a woman in a sleek navy suit, her mother's chief advisor, Ms. Durant. Cold, precise, unblinking. "I trust you'll reconsider your decision once you've had rest," Durant said, eyes scanning a folder in her lap. Eva didn't answer. She looked out the window at the fading edge of the town, red barns, a field of sunflowers, a picket fence she and Maddie had painted together 2 days earlier. The sight of it made something in her chest twist. Durant continued. "The board has paused the engagement announcement, but your father expects a statement before the quarter's end." "Let them keep waiting," Eva murmured. Durant's brows rose. "I hope this isn't another act of rebellion. You've made your point. Now it's time to come home." Eva finally turned to her voice, low but clear. "That's just it. That place was never home." Durant didn't answer. She didn't need to. They both knew the cost of disobedience. Back in Ridgefield, Luke found himself avoiding the living room entirely. Every corner reminded him of her Eva perched on the armrest sipping tea, her laughter bouncing off the walls, the sweater she'd left draped over the back of the chair. He busied himself at the garage working late into the night. When Maddie called him to dinner, he said he'd already eaten. When she asked if they could make cinnamon rolls again, he said maybe next weekend. She didn't ask twice. One evening, Maddie came into the shop with something clutched in her hands, a small mason jar filled with folded paper. She held it out wordlessly. Luke wiped his hands on a rag. "What's this? She made it," Maddie said. "Eva," before she left. He unscrewed the lid and pulled out a folded note. It was in Eva's handwriting. "Things I never had until I met you. 1. Pancakes made with too much cinnamon. 2. A child's drawing on the fridge. 3. A place that let me forget my last name." Luke stared at the paper, the breath catching in his throat. "There are more," Maddie whispered. She wrote 12. He replaced the note, screwed the lid shut, and held the jar like something sacred. Eva sat on the edge of her bed in her family's Manhattan penthouse, staring out the 27th floor window at a city that never slept and never cared. She was back in her old life-tailored suits, scheduled appearances, morning calls with lawyers and investors. But everything felt muted. She attended dinners she didn't taste, smiled for cameras she no longer noticed, answered questions with the poise of someone who had memorized the script long ago. And every night she pulled the curtain back and imagined what Maddie was reading, whether Luke still left the porch light on. She opened her planner one evening and found a small photograph tucked inside Maddie's drawing of the three of them under the crepe myrtle tree. Scrawled in green crayon beneath it, "Family Tree." Eva pressed the paper to her chest and began to cry, not out of regret, but out of grief for the version of herself she had almost become, and the one she'd nearly lost. A week passed, then 2. One evening, Maddie sat in the backyard, legs swinging off the bench under the tree. She held the mason jar and turned it slowly in her hands. Luke came out, wiping his hands on a rag. "She's not coming back, is she?" Maddie asked. He knelt beside her. "I don't know, kiddo." Maddie looked up at the sky. "I planted something, just in case." He blinked. "What do you mean?" She pointed to the soil beneath the tree. "A seed. From the festival. Eva said, if you plant something where your heart is, maybe it grows roots." Luke looked down at the dirt, then back at his daughter. He didn't say a word, but inside, something shifted. That night, as the stars came out one by one over the town Eva had left behind, Luke sat on the porch alone, the mason jar in his hands. He opened it, pulled out the last note. 12. I didn't know what love felt like until I saw it in the way you looked at your daughter. And then, somehow, I felt it too. He closed his eyes, and for the first time since she left, Luke Tanner allowed himself to believe. Sometimes love doesn't arrive with certainty. Sometimes it returns, when the heart is ready and the porch light is still on. The nights had grown colder in Ridgefield, and with them came longer silences. Luke sat at the kitchen table long after Maddie had gone to bed, a pen in his hand and a single sheet of paper in front of him. The old lamp cast a warm pool of light across the table, illuminating the steam rising from his untouched mug of tea. He wasn't sure what had led him here. Maybe it was the jar of notes Maddie had placed on the mantel, or maybe it was the ache that hadn't gone away since the morning Eva left. Or maybe, as Maddie had said with all the wisdom of a 10-year-old, he just missed her too much not to say it out loud. So he wrote, Eva, you once told me you didn't know who you were anymore. I didn't say it then, but I wish I had. What I saw in you wasn't a runaway bride or a name in a headline. I saw someone brave enough to leave everything fake behind in search of something real. And if that's still what you're looking for, you've already found it. It's here, in this creaky little house, in burnt pancakes and driveway chalk drawings, in Maddie's laugh, in me. I can't offer you the world, Eva, but I can offer you a place to land, a place to be messy, a place to be seen. You once said this house felt full of grace. Maybe that's because you brought some of it with you. If you're still out there searching, just know you've already been found. We're still here, and we'd still choose you. Luke, he stared at the letter for a long time, rereading it twice, 3 times. Then with a sigh, he folded it carefully and slid it into an envelope. But he didn't mail it. He walked out to the backyard beneath the tree Maddie had named their family tree, and knelt beside the small planter she'd buried her seed in weeks ago. It hadn't sprouted. Not yet. But it hadn't died either. Luke pulled a mason jar from the bench, an empty one this time, and placed the letter inside. Then he buried it carefully next to Maddie's seed. If this ever grows, he murmured, maybe it'll carry something more than roots. Miles away, in Manhattan, Eva stood in a boardroom full of men in suits, her reflection staring back at her from a wall of glass. They were discussing logistics projections, headlines. Her return had been carefully managed, a few staged photographs, a silent press statement, and enough polite nods to make it seem like everything had returned to normal. but inside she felt like a mannequin dressed in someone else's clothes. When the meeting ended, her father caught up to her in the hallway. "You're quiet," he noted. "I'm listening," she said. "To what?" "To myself," she replied. "Finally." He studied her brows, furrowing. "Is this about the boy in Ridgefield?" "He's not a boy," she said calmly. "He's a man raising a daughter. He's kind, honest, the kind of man you couldn't buy with all your shareholders' money." Her father gave a faint scoff. That life was a detour, Evelyn. "You have a role to play here." "No," she said, stepping back. "You have a role you need me to play. But I'm done acting." She turned and walked away, heart-pounding, not toward rebellion, but toward something she'd never had before. Resolution. That weekend, Eva returned to the penthouse and found a letter waiting on her nightstand. Not from Luke, from her mother. The envelope was cream-colored, handwritten in elegant cursive. "Dearest Evelyn, I won't pretend to understand the choices you've made, but I remember what it felt like to be your age, trapped in a world I didn't build, told who to love, how to smile, what to sacrifice. I didn't fight like you did. I stayed. And I've lived with that silence for a very long time. I saw your eyes in the paper the day you ran. Not panic freedom. Real, terrifying, beautiful freedom. If this man you found gave you even a fraction of that, then don't let the noise pull you away. Go. Find your voice. And if you ever want to come home again, let it be on your own terms." Mother Eva read it twice, then again. Her breath caught, but this time not from fear. From something else. Permission. Back in Ridgefield, Maddie sat at the kitchen table drawing in silence. She looked up as Luke entered, holding up her sketch. It was a new picture of the backyard, complete with the little tree, and something new, a small mailbox drawn beside it with a heart on the side. "I made a wish," she said softly. Luke knelt beside her. What kind of wish that the tree would grow tall enough to bring her back? Luke smiled and kissed her head. "It's a good wish." Maddie looked up. Do wishes work? He thought for a moment. Sometimes. But only when someone's brave enough to answer them. That night, long after the town had gone to sleep, headlights rolled quietly down the gravel road leading to Luke's house. The engine turned off. A door clicked shut. The porch light flickered on. And a figure stepped out into the night, a bag in one hand, a small envelope in the other. Eva stood beneath the old crepe myrtle tree, kneeling beside the spot where Maddie had planted her seed. Her fingers brushed the soil, still soft, and she smiled as she noticed something new pushing through the dirt. A sprout. Tiny. Brave. Real. She placed her envelope beneath the jar Maddie had left there, a return letter. Then she stood up, brushed off her hands, and walked toward the porch. The light above the door glowed warm and steady, and behind it, hearts waited, no longer hoping, but ready. The Ridgefield Harvest Festival unfolded like a dream that had waited all year to return. String lights crisscrossed the square, their golden glow dancing over caramel apples, hay rides, and hand-painted signs. Children laughed as they chased each other around booths lined with knitted scarves and spiced cider. The brass band played a slow, nostalgic tune that wrapped around the townspeople like a warm quilt. Luke Tanner stood off to the side, hands shoved into the pockets of his jacket, eyes scanning the crowd. He hadn't meant to come. He'd told himself he was too tired that Maddie could go with her school group. But when she slipped her hand into his that morning and asked, "What if she comes back today?" he hadn't had the heart to say no. So here they were, him and Maddie, waiting without waiting, hoping without saying the word. She would have liked this, Maddie said now, craning her neck to look at the main stage. Luke glanced down. Yeah, she would have. I drew a picture for her, Maddie added. It's in my backpack, just in case. Luke smiled faintly. That's a good thing to have, just in case. Behind the crowd, unnoticed, Eva stood at the edge of the square taking it all in. She had arrived hours earlier, unsure if she'd find the courage to walk into the light. Now, dressed in a simple navy sweater and jeans, her hair swept back in a loose braid, She looked like any woman from any town. No bodyguards, no headlines, no script. Just her. She took a slow breath and stepped forward. Every sound around her seemed to fall away, the music, the chatter, even her own heartbeat as she walked past booths and familiar faces. No one recognized her yet. Not like this? But then Maddie saw her first. The little girl froze mid-step, eyes wide, hands gripping the straps of her backpack. "Daddy," she whispered, tugging Luke's sleeve. "It's her." Luke turned. There she was. Standing 10 feet away, sunlight catching the edges of her hair, eyes glassy with emotion. She didn't move. She didn't speak. Neither did he. Not for a moment that stretched long and soft as if the whole world had stopped spinning just to witness their reunion. And then Maddie ran. She launched herself into Eva's arms, nearly knocking her over. Eva dropped to her knees, clutching the girl tightly, tears falling freely. "I missed you," Maddie whispered into her neck. "I missed you more," Eva choked. Luke stepped closer, heart pounding. He stopped a few feet away. Eva looked up. Her voice was low but sure. "I found the letter." Luke's breath caught. Eva stood slowly, keeping Maddie's hand in hers. "And I left one for you. Under the tree." He nodded. "I saw. I didn't come back to visit," she said. Luke's jaw tightened. "No." She shook her head. "I came to stay." Another pause. "Then I bought the garage." Luke blinked. "What?" She smiled nervously. "Well, not bought, exactly. More like saved. Bennett was about to sell it to a chain shop. I stepped in. Said I'd only fund the repairs if it stayed local under your name." He stared at her. "Why would you?" "Because you fixed more than engines in that place," she said, voice thick. "You built something real, and I want to help keep it alive. Not from above, not with headlines. Just beside you." The words landed between them like soft thunder. Luke stepped closer. "And what about your old life? I'm not going back," she said. "My parents are learning to live without directing mine. It's hard for them, but it's what I need." He studied her face, the steadiness in her eyes, the slight tremble of her fingers. She was scared, but she was here. That was everything. "I kept the porch light on," he murmured. "I know," she whispered. "I saw it." Maddie squeezed both their hands. "Does this mean we get to be a family now?" They looked at each other. Luke bent down and touched Maddie's cheek. "It means we're going to try. Every day." Eva knelt beside them, brushing a tear from Maddie's face. Together. Later that evening, after the sun had set and the sky glowed with 1,000 fairy lights, Maddie stood on the small stage in the square, clutching a sheet of paper with both hands. The MC leaned into the mic. Next up, from Willow Creek Elementary, Maddie Tanner with her original poem, "The Woman Under the Tree." The crowd applauded politely. Luke stood in the back, Eva beside him, their hands barely touching but tethered nonetheless. Maddie stepped forward and began to read, her voice small but steady. She came with her heart in her hands, wearing shadows and a runaway name. She knelt by a tree that had never bloomed and whispered to the roots just the same. The crowd grew silent. She stayed not because she had to, but because someone saw through the storm. And in the light of the porch she feared most. She found a place to feel warm. Luke swallowed hard. She is not made of glass or gold, but of stories she never told. And now I know beneath that tree she planted a seed that grew into me. There was silence, then applause. But Luke and Eva didn't clap. They just looked at each other, breathless, changed. And in that moment, with the sound of their daughter's voice still echoing through the fall air, they knew she hadn't just come back. She had come home. The next morning was unusually still, as if the town itself was holding its breath. The leaves whispered across the driveway, and a thin veil of mist clung to the backyard where the small tree Maddie had planted now bore 2 tiny buds, green, trembling alive. Eva stood by the window in the kitchen, a cup of coffee warming her palms. She watched as Luke backed his truck into the garage bay, his garage now. Well, partly hers too. She smiled. They'd signed the paperwork at the county clerk's office just that morning. Luke Tanner Auto and Repair was now a partnership in the eyes of the law, but far more in the eyes of the people who mattered most, Luke, Maddie, and Eva. And it hadn't been a gesture of charity or power. It had been a conversation. Luke had paced across the garage floor, wiping his hands on a rag. If this is going to work, I need to be clear you're not buying into this to save me. Eva had knotted hands in her jacket pockets. I know. I'm investing in something I believe in. And I don't want to answer to a board. Then don't, she said, smiling. Answer to Maddie. They had laughed, then awkward but real, and it had felt like a beginning. Neither of them had rehearsed for, but both were finally ready to write. Now, Luke entered the kitchen and kissed the top of Eva's head without thinking like it had always been that way. She tilted her face toward him, a quiet joy blooming across her features. Garage is cleaned out, he said. Got the new lift coming next week. I'll help with the paperwork, Eva replied. Bennett said he'd email over the inspection forms. He poured himself a second cup of coffee and joined her at the table. They sat in the golden hush of late morning, neither needing to fill the silence. But after a moment, Eva reached into her tote bag and placed a small velvet box on the table between them. Luke raised an eyebrow. You proposing already? She laughed. No, just returning something. He opened the box slowly. Inside lay her engagement ring, the one from the wedding she had left behind. Elegant cold cut for appearances rather than sentiment. I thought about selling it, she said. But then I realized it doesn't belong in a vault or on a finger. It belongs in a chapter I've closed. Luke looked at the ring, then back at her. You sure? She nodded. I've never been more sure of anything. He closed the box and set it aside gently. Then let's bury it. Eva blinked. Bury it. He stood taking the box in hand. Come on. Maddie's seed got roots. Maybe this will too. 10 minutes later, they were in the backyard with Maddie beside them, shovel in hand. The small tree had grown just tall enough to cast a gentle shadow on the grass. Right here, Luke said, kneeling by the roots. Maddie looked curious. What is it? Something that doesn't need to grow anymore, Eva replied gently. Something that helped me become who I am, but doesn't define who I'm going to be. She handed the ring box to Maddie, who placed it in the shallow hole with the reverence of a ceremony. Then, together, they covered it with soil. Luke smoothed the dirt with his palm. Good riddance. Eva looked up at the branches above them. And good beginning. That afternoon, the garage reopened with little fanfare but quiet significance. Luke tuned a classic Mustang while Eva sorted invoices on the desk in the corner. They moved around each other like dance partners who had never rehearsed yet never missed a step. A customer came in, a young mother with a minivan and a flat tire. She paused at the door, confused. Is this still Luke's shop? She asked. Eva stood up. It is. I'm Eva. Oh, the woman said, glancing at the sign. Tanner and Reed. Eva smiled. We kept it simple. The woman looked around. Place feels different. Luke called from under the car hood. Still the same grease stains, but brighter somehow. The woman said half to herself. Eva met Luke's eyes and smiled. Maybe because we left the lights on. That evening, they grilled dinner on the porch, burgers, corn, sweet tea. Maddie danced barefoot in the grass while Luke and Eva sat on the swing watching her trace stars into the sky with her hands. You think it'll last? Eva asked softly. Luke looked over at her. What this piece? This us? He didn't answer right away. He took her hand thumb, brushing gently over her knuckles. I don't believe in guarantees, he said. But I believe in showing up. Every day. Eva leaned her head on his shoulder. That's more than I've ever had. Maddie ran toward them, breathless and giddy. Can we plant something else tomorrow? Like a rose bush, or maybe blueberries? Luke laughed. only if you promise not to eat the whole crop before we get one pie out of it." Eva stood and reached for Maddie's hand. "Let's make a garden. A real one." Luke watched them dance across the lawn silhouetted against the setting sun and felt something settle in his chest, not excitement, not fear. Just a deep, bone-level sense of rightness. Not because everything was perfect, but because it was theirs. And under the earth beside the growing tree lay a ring that once stood for an empire. Now it stood for something far greater. A choice. A woman choosing herself. A man choosing to let someone in again. A girl choosing to believe in magic. And together they were building something no inheritance could buy, no name could control, and no storm could wash away. Home. The morning of the first snow was the kind that arrived without fanfare, just a quiet softness that settled gently over rooftops, fence posts, and bare branches. It clung to the porch railing and blanketed the backyard, turning everything familiar into something gently transformed. From the kitchen window, Eva watched flakes dance down swirling like ash from a forgotten fire. She sipped coffee wearing Luke's old flannel shirt over her pajamas, her bare feet warmed by the rug beneath her. She had lived in this house for nearly 2 months now, yet each morning still felt like a gift she hadn't quite earned. But perhaps that was the magic of starting over. You didn't need to deserve peace. You just had to choose it. Behind her, Maddie tiptoed in wearing fuzzy socks, her hair a halo of sleep. "Is it snowing, for real?" she whispered. Eva nodded, smiling. "The first one." Maddie pressed her nose to the window. "Do you think the tree will be okay?" "It's strong," Eva said, "just like the girl who planted it." Later that morning, the three of them bundled into scarves and boots and stepped into the quiet backyard. The world was muffled beneath the snow, the kind of silence that asks you to speak softly or not at all. The small tree, now waist-high, stood proudly in the center of the yard, its delicate limbs dusted in white. Around it were the footprints of a fox clementine, ever elusive, still visiting from time to time. Maddie knelt in the snow and opened a little wooden box she'd been working on in school. Inside it were notes, each folded carefully scrawled in her uneven, determined handwriting. "I made memory leaves," she explained. "For the tree." Luke raised a brow. "Memory leaves," Maddie nodded. "We write down the best parts of our year and hang them on the branches. So the tree remembers too." Eva knelt beside her. "Can we help?" Maddie smiled wide. "You have to." So together they wrote. Luke scribbled, fixing the Mustang with Maddie while she wore a welding mask 3 sizes too big. Eva wrote watching Maddie read aloud on stage, her voice braver than my own heart. And Maddie, with her tongue poking out the side of her mouth, wrote, "When I saw Eva standing at the festival and knew she came back." They hung the notes with string little paper leaves that fluttered in the breeze like whispers of something sacred. As they finished, Luke looked at the two of them. His daughter and the woman who had wandered into their lives one rainy night and changed everything, and he felt a quiet bloom of gratitude so deep it brought heat to his chest. "We should name the tree," he said. Eva turned to him. "You first." Luke looked down at the rough bark, the tiny buds that had survived the cold, and said, "Grace." Maddie clapped. "Yes." Eva tilted her head. "Why?" "Grace." Luke shrugged. "Because none of this was deserved. None of it was expected. But it was given anyway." Eva looked at him, eyes glassy, and reached for his hand. That night, after Maddie was tucked into bed with her favorite book and the fox paw prints disappeared beneath fresh snow, Luke and Eva sat by the fireplace in the quiet glow of flickering orange light. She leaned against him, wrapped in a blanket. He rubbed slow circles into her back. "Do you ever think about how close we were to never meeting?" she asked. "All the time. I could have taken the highway. I could have left just 5 minutes later. I could have let fear keep me running. I could have let fear keep me from opening the door." She smiled against his shoulder. "But you didn't. Neither did you." They sat in silence, fire crackling gently beside them. Then Eva whispered, "I was taught that home was something you built with marble and security systems and legacies." Luke kissed the top of her head. And now she looked up at him. "Now I know it's a little crooked porch light, a girl who names foxes, and a man who never asked me to be anything but real." Luke smiled. "That's the only version I ever wanted." Weeks later, on Christmas morning, the house was alive with laughter and the scent of cinnamon rolls. There were only a few presents under the tree, but the best gift came in a simple hand-drawn card from Maddie. On the front, a crayon sketch of their backyard tree, now full-grown and blooming with pink blossoms that hadn't yet come, but would soon. Inside, she'd written in blocky letters, "This is what love looks like when it stays." And out in the yard, beneath the quiet snow and sleeping roots still buried near the heart of the tree, was a ring that once symbolized a life of obligation. Now it marked something far more sacred, a life chosen, a home earned, a love rebuilt from the rubble of what once was and bloomed into what could be. And every spring when the first blossoms returned, that tree would remember, just as they would, forever. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far this story has traveled. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you won't miss any of our upcoming tales of love, kindness, and second chances. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. Take care, and until next time, stay kind.